My name is Kate, and I'm 33 years old. I work in an office. I met my husband, John, through a friend. After dating for 2 years, we got married a year ago. John is a quiet man but very smart, and I like that about him. But now, I'm starting to regret marrying him. One reason is that I don't like visiting his family home. It's very far away, and honestly, it makes me nervous. Before we visited for the first time, John told me it was old-fashioned, like a house from Grandpa's time. I thought maybe it would be charming, like a historic house. Those kinds of places can be fun to visit. But when we arrived, I was shocked. The house was falling apart. It looked like it could collapse any moment. There were strange plants growing all over the walls, and some of the windows were broken and covered with cardboard. I couldn't believe people actually lived there. I asked John if we were at the right place, and he said yes. The house next door was clean and had a lovely garden, which made me compare it to his family home. John didn't seem to notice how surprised I was, and just opened the door without ringing a bell. He called out, "Hey, we're here." His parents came out smiling, which made me feel a little better. Inside, the floor creaked with every step. The house was as old inside as it looked outside. We finished greeting his parents and then went back home. Even though I was shocked by the house, I told myself I wouldn't have to visit often, so I could manage. After we got married, I learned more about John. He really likes to keep things for a long time. For example, he wouldn't throw out an old shirt even though the neck was stretched out. He said, "It's still good to wear. It has character. Like those distressed jeans people buy." I thought it was nice that he cared about his things, but it annoyed me when he started talking about my stuff. When I wanted a new phone, because my old one's battery was dying, he said, "Why? It still works, doesn't it? Phones are expensive, and it's coming out of our household budget." I felt guilty and didn't buy a new phone, even though I wanted one. Meanwhile, John had been using his phone for 5 years. Still, things were okay between us. John always ate the food I cooked and said it was delicious, which made me happy. Then one day John said, "Let's go to my parents' house for Thanksgiving." I didn't really want to, but I agreed. When we arrived, the house looked just as bad as before. The vines on the walls had grown even more because of the summer sun. While we were chatting, John's dad, Daniel, asked us to help with the garden. I didn't want to because it was so hot, but I couldn't say no. As we worked, I noticed the neighbors staring at us from their garden. I said hello, but they looked confused and went back inside. John's mom, Elizabeth, said, "Don't bother greeting them. That person isn't right in the head." Her loud voice startled me. After an hour, we finished. I was so sweaty that I needed a bath. That's when I discovered something shocking. The bathroom wasn't inside the house. It was outside in a shed. When I asked John about it, he said, "Oh, that's the bath. It's always been outside." The shed looked old and worn out. I didn't want to go in, but I had to clean up. Inside, the bathroom was surprisingly clean, but then I noticed there was no lock. When I asked John, he said, "It's inside our property, so it's fine." I was shocked. Even the toilet didn't have a lock, and the front door was never locked either. When I told Elizabeth that it's dangerous to leave things unlocked, she said, "This is the countryside. No one's going to steal anything." I couldn't sleep well that night. I held my bag close to me and decided I wouldn't stay overnight here again. Months later, around New Year's, John told me we had to visit his family again because his uncle and cousins were coming. I was annoyed because we had planned to visit my family instead. But John said, "You're being selfish. It's normal to visit the husband's family sometimes." I was so angry, but I went with him anyway. When we got there, the house was crowded with relatives. Everyone was nice and said kind things about me. But I noticed John and his parents looked upset when people praised me. After the relatives left, John's mom said, "By the way, Kate, wasn't it a bit selfish to ask for locks? Look, we put one on for you." Her words made me feel uneasy. I realized how different John and I were, and I started wondering if we could make this marriage work. Evelyn found herself in a situation she never could have imagined when her sister-in-law Elizabeth casually told her to go to the bathroom. Evelyn was puzzled by the suggestion, but decided to comply. Upon reaching the bathroom, she was startled to notice something odd. The lock on the door wasn't like a normal lock you'd find inside a bathroom. Instead, it was a simple hook, and it was on the outside of the door, not the inside. This discovery immediately unsettled her. Why would a bathroom lock be positioned this way? It didn't feel right, but Evelyn tried to brush the thought aside, forcing herself to stay calm. She convinced herself it might just be an old, quirky feature of the house. Still, as she glanced at the lock, a strange chill ran down her spine. Something about it felt wrong. Before she could say anything, Elizabeth's voice broke her train of thought. "Let us know if you want the door locked," Elizabeth said with a malicious grin that only deepened Evelyn's unease. Evelyn looked up at her sister-in-law and couldn't help but notice the smugness in her tone, the way she smirked like she was enjoying some private joke. Evelyn forced a polite smile, trying not to show how uncomfortable she felt. But inside, her mind was racing. Why would she say that? And why is she smiling like that? She wanted to ask, but something told her it wouldn't be worth it. Elizabeth's grin only made her seem more spiteful. Evelyn thought, this isn't funny. What kind of person acts like this? Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, staring at the lock and replaying Elizabeth's words in her head. It wasn't just a lock. It was the way Elizabeth seemed to enjoy her discomfort. Evelyn felt a flicker of anger rise within her, but she quickly pushed it down. She reminded herself that she was a guest in this house, and that making a scene would only make things worse. Trying to stay composed, Evelyn muttered, "This is ridiculous. It's a bathroom, not a prison." She meant to say it quietly, more to herself than to anyone else, but Elizabeth must have overheard her. Elizabeth's grin grew wider, and her eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint. "What's that?" Elizabeth asked, pretending not to understand. "Did you say something, Evelyn?" Evelyn shook her head quickly. "No, it's nothing." But Elizabeth wasn't about to let it go. She leaned in closer, her tone dripping with mock concern. "Oh, I hope you're not uncomfortable. You're our guest, after all. We wouldn't want you to feel trapped." Her voice lingered on the last word, and Evelyn couldn't help but feel the sharp sting of its double meaning. Evelyn clenched her fists, struggling to keep her emotions in check. She wanted to tell Elizabeth exactly how she felt, but she knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she took a deep breath and decided to play along, hoping to diffuse the situation. "Thank you," she said as evenly as she could manage. "I'll be fine." But Elizabeth wasn't done yet. As Evelyn turned to step into the bathroom, Elizabeth chuckled softly, a sound that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "You know," Elizabeth said casually, "we don't take too kindly to people who think they're better than us." Evelyn stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. What was Elizabeth trying to say? She turned to look at her sister-in-law, who now had an icy, almost triumphant look in her eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Evelyn asked carefully, not wanting to escalate things, but feeling like she needed to defend herself. Elizabeth shrugged, her grin never faltering. "Oh, nothing. Just saying. You know, not everyone went to a fancy college like you did. Some of us had to work for what we have. But I'm sure you already knew that." Evelyn blinked, taken aback. She had no idea what Elizabeth was talking about. She had never once bragged about her education, and she certainly didn't think less of anyone who hadn't gone to college. If anything, she had always tried to avoid talking about her background, knowing it could sometimes make others feel uncomfortable. "I'm not sure where this is coming from," Evelyn said slowly, trying to keep her voice calm. "I've never said anything like that." Elizabeth waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't play innocent. We all know what you really think." Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, Elizabeth turned on her heel and walked away, her laughter echoing down the hallway. Evelyn stood there for a moment, stunned. She didn't know what to make of Elizabeth's behavior. Was she jealous? Insecure? Or just mean for the sake of being mean? Whatever it was, it didn't make sense. Evelyn felt a wave of frustration wash over her. This is ridiculous, she thought again. Why am I letting her get to me? She shook her head, determined not to let Elizabeth ruin her day. But as she stepped into the bathroom and closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. The image of that hook on the outside of the door lingered in her mind, and Elizabeth's mocking grin was burned into her memory. Evelyn glanced around the small bathroom, trying to distract herself. It was cold and drafty, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. She shivered, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. Just get through this, she told herself. You don't have to stay here forever. But even as she tried to focus on the task at hand, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. She kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see it swing open or hear Elizabeth's voice on the other side. Why would she even joke about locking the door? Evelyn wondered. That's not funny. That's just weird. As she finished up and prepared to leave the bathroom, Evelyn hesitated for a moment. She reached for the doorknob, but stopped just short of touching it. What if? The thought was ridiculous, but she couldn't help but imagine the door refusing to budge, trapping her inside. Shaking her head, Evelyn pushed the thought away. Don't be silly. Nothing's going to happen. But as she opened the door and stepped back into the hallway, she caught a glimpse of Elizabeth down the corridor. Elizabeth was watching her, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. Evelyn's stomach turned. Elizabeth didn't say anything this time, but the look on her face said enough. It was as if she was silently daring Evelyn to react, to make a scene. Evelyn didn't take the bait. She squared her shoulders and walked past Elizabeth without a word. But as she moved further away, she could hear Elizabeth's soft laughter following her, like a ghost haunting her steps. When Evelyn finally reached her room, she closed the door behind her and let out a long, shaky breath. She felt like she had just escaped something she couldn't quite explain but knew wasn't good. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. Why is she like this? What did I ever do to her? Evelyn didn't have the answers. But one thing was clear. Staying in this house was going to be much harder than she had anticipated. If we were home, this is how things would go. My family had been living in a small, old apartment for some time. The reason we were in this cramped space was simple. We were saving up money to buy a new house. Our plan was to get a bigger, better place where we could finally feel settled and comfortable. But until that happened, we had to live in this tiny apartment, trying to make it work. Every time my in-laws came to visit, they would settle down in the dining room or on the sofa, and almost immediately, they'd ask to see the documents for the house we were building. It wasn't just a casual request. They'd ask to see the plans, the designs, the layouts, everything. Before I could stop him, my husband would happily pull out the papers and start explaining the entire plan to them. It was like he couldn't wait to share every detail. He loved showing them off, even though I didn't think they needed to see everything every single time. I didn't understand why he always did this. Why do you have to show them everything when they ask? You know they're going to pick it apart and try to change things, I said to him one day. He looked at me with a look that made me feel guilty, like I was overreacting. But I had seen this happen before. Every time they looked at the plans, they'd start offering unsolicited advice. This layout doesn't make sense. You should change the kitchen. It's in the wrong spot. Or, there aren't enough Japanese-style rooms. You need more of those if you want people to feel comfortable when they're older. They even suggested adding more rooms for children, saying that one room wouldn't be enough if we had another baby. It felt like an interrogation. My mother-in-law would ask me question after question, pointing out things she didn't like, as though she was the expert on everything. There was one moment when she said something that really made me snap. She said, "This house is a disaster. How can you call yourself a professional? You should have asked me for advice on everything. I've seen so many houses, and I can tell which rooms are comfortable and which ones are not. At this point, I was frustrated, but I tried to stay calm. Well, based on what we've already discussed as a couple, we've already made decisions with the contractor. We've laid out the plans according to our needs, and it's too late to change anything now. I understand you have your own opinion, but this is what we decided, I said, trying to stay polite, though I was angry inside. My mother-in-law didn't let up. She wasn't done with her criticism. Well, what about the furniture? And the appliances? You need to pick better things. I know what works. Trust me. She went on, acting like she was an interior designer. She talked about how things needed to be arranged to bring good luck, and how if things weren't perfect, bad things would happen. I was starting to lose patience, but I didn't want to start a fight. So I said jokingly, well, maybe we should make it a two-family house, and you and Dad can pay half of the cost since you have so many ideas about how it should be. That joke didn't go over well at all. My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger. She was furious. You want me to pay for your house? You're a gold digger, she shouted. Her reaction was way over the top, and it made me feel like I had done something horrible. After that, my in-laws left early, and I was left fuming. I couldn't believe how much they had interfered with our plans. Later that night, after putting our daughter to bed, my husband came to me. You know, my parents are just trying to give advice. They're not trying to upset you, he said, his voice full of frustration. Don't be so cold to them. I was still upset. It's not that I don't want their advice. It's just that they keep interfering in everything we do. They think they have a say in every little detail of our lives. It's like we're not allowed to make our own decisions, I replied, my voice shaking with emotion. He didn't really understand. You're overreacting. They're just trying to help. Think about how you would feel if it was your daughter one day. That's not the point, I said, raising my voice. Just because they're your parents doesn't mean they have the right to control everything we do. They don't help us with anything. They don't pay the bills. They don't do anything, but they act like they own us. My husband looked at me like I was being unreasonable. He didn't want to hear me out. Calm down, he said. You're not showing enough compassion. Just think it over. Don't get upset. But I couldn't calm down. I was so angry that I couldn't sleep that night. I felt completely misunderstood, and my frustration only grew. I couldn't believe that my husband wasn't on my side in all of this. It felt like I was the only one trying to protect our family and our space. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of arguing, the house was completed. My family was excited. We had spent so long saving for this house, and now it was finally ready. We couldn't wait to move in. But as soon as we started settling in, my husband made another surprising announcement. By the way, he said casually, my parents are moving in with us today. They're going to take the big room upstairs. We'll take the smaller one. What? What do you mean? They're moving in? I asked, completely shocked. We agreed that one of the rooms upstairs would be for Chloe, not for them. My husband didn't seem bothered by my surprise. Don't worry. I've already shown them the room. They liked it. It'll be fine. Wait, you showed them the house before we even moved in? You let them see it before we did. I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. It's fine, he said, brushing it off like it was no big deal. It doesn't hurt anything. That's not true, I snapped, feeling my anger rise again. You can't just let them come in and take over without talking to me first. You can't make decisions about our house without asking me. I was so furious that I couldn't stay in the room with him. I stormed upstairs, locked myself in the bedroom, and just sat there trying to calm down. I needed space to think. My mind was spinning. I was overwhelmed and felt trapped. My husband had completely ignored my feelings. Later that afternoon, my in-laws showed up, bringing a moving truck filled with their belongings. They acted like they had every right to be there. They didn't even ask if it was okay. They just walked in, making rude comments about how we hadn't cleaned up enough and how the place looked like a mess. I told Victor it wouldn't be a problem. My father-in-law said with a grin. It's a problem. I snapped. I didn't agree to this. I didn't know anything about you moving in. You're his wife. You have to do what he says, my father-in-law said, raising his voice. I don't have to do anything. I shouted back. This isn't just about you two. This is about our family, too. I didn't agree to this, and I'm not going to live with you. Well, if you don't like it, why don't you leave? My father-in-law said, looking at me like I was a problem. Before I could say anything more, my husband entered the room, looking worried. Evelyn, don't fight with my parents, he said. I'm not fighting with anyone. I shouted. I'm telling you, I can't live with them. I don't want to live with your parents. You're supposed to obey me. You're my wife, my husband said, his voice cold. I couldn't believe it. I'm a person, not just your wife. I yelled back. My father-in-law heard this and shouted, I don't want a wife like that for you. Fine, then let's get a divorce. I shouted, if you want it that badly, let's get a divorce right now. The room went completely silent. My husband and father-in-law were both stunned, unable to say anything. I continued, and by the way, this house? I paid for it all with MY's savings. Victor didn't contribute a penny. He even borrowed $29,718 from me to help build it, and I have proof. My in-laws were speechless. My husband was pale, realizing the truth. I didn't wait for their response. I quickly packed my things, grabbed my daughter's favorite toys, and loaded everything into my car. I wasn't going to stay in that house another minute. I went to pick up my daughter from daycare and then drove straight to my parents' house. When they saw me, they were shocked, but they didn't ask many questions. They were just happy I was there, and they promised to help me in any way they could. I explained everything that had happened, and they were fully supportive. From that moment on, I knew I had to take control of my life and my daughter's future. I wasn't going to stay. One evening, I worked hard to write down everything that had happened with my husband and his parents. I also saved the recordings of my talks with them from my phone to my computer and a USB drive. Then, I visited several lawyers during my free time and weekends, trying to find someone I could trust. After some time, I found a lawyer who seemed nice, and I asked him to help me. I was so busy that a whole week passed quickly since I ran away from my new house. One day after work, my husband was waiting for me outside. I wanted to call him my ex-husband, but since we weren't divorced yet, I couldn't. I was scared he might get angry. So I agreed to go with him to a coffee shop where we could talk in a safe place. I turned on the voice recorder on my phone, just in case. I asked him calmly, "What do you want to talk about?" He said, "I'll give you the house, Evelyn. I'll take my name off the lease. Can we just forget about the money?" I replied, "I'm sorry, but I can't live in that house anymore. Your parents came into the house before we did, didn't they?" He asked, "Why does that even matter to you?" "It matters to me," I answered firmly. I took a sip of my coffee and looked at him. He looked messy and tired. His hair was sticking out, he had a scruffy beard, and his suit looked unclean. He kept talking, saying, "I can't pay back all that money so fast. I didn't think you were serious about the divorce. I thought it was just a threat." I told him, "I am serious, and I can't stand your rude parents anymore." Then I added, "I have to go. Chloe is waiting for me." When he mentioned Chloe, it made me nervous. I went home to my parents and told them to be careful not to let anyone take Chloe away. A few days later, the daycare center called me. My in-laws had come there trying to take Chloe. I rushed over. Thankfully, I had already told the daycare not to let them take her. They kept Chloe safe in another room and waited for me to arrive. When I got there, my in-laws yelled at me, "Give us our grandchild, you thief." I said, "I'm not a thief." They called me a liar and said I couldn't have saved so much money on my own. I explained, "The money I used was my own. Some came from my parents, some was a gift from my grandmother, and some was my savings." They didn't believe me and said, "Why didn't your grandmother leave any money for our son?" After a lot of shouting, I told them, "I'm getting divorced and I will raise Chloe myself. Don't come to the daycare again. It's causing problems." Then I took Chloe and went home. Even though I warned them, my husband and his parents kept coming back to my parents' house. They grabbed my arm and shouted at me sometimes. I recorded everything on my phone. A month later, my lawyer sent a message to my husband, asking him to pay back the money he owed me and agree to the divorce. He didn't want to, especially when it came to Chloe's custody. But when I told him I'd also asked for alimony, extra money from him for the divorce, he became calmer. Eventually, I won. He had to pay back the money, and I got custody of Chloe. It took longer than I thought because he couldn't sell the new house quickly. My husband and his parents couldn't afford the house, and when they sold it, they lost money. After paying fees and other costs, my husband had to borrow money from the bank. Now, he and his parents live in a small, shabby house with his divorced sister and her 2 teenage sons. 6 people in a tiny house made them fight all the time. Luckily, they stopped bothering us. For years later, Chloe is now in 2nd grade. We live near my parents' house, and they help take care of her when I'm busy. I thought we'd stay like this forever, just the 2 of us. But then I met someone. He is a 36-year-old man who is also divorced and has a daughter in 1st grade. We met while dropping off and picking up our kids from daycare. He told me he liked me, and now we go on outings together with our kids. One day, Chloe said, "If we build a house, we should all have our own rooms, and we can get a dog." Her words made me happy. This man had already asked me to marry him, but I told him I needed time to think. I walked up to Chloe, hugged her, and said, "Yes, I do. I want to build another house. This time, I want to talk about it with the whole family, so we can make it a home where everyone is happy." "Mommy, no. Mommy, go over there." Those were the first shocking words my 4-year-old son Ethan ever said to Sophia during an argument between us. I couldn't believe my ears. My sweet little boy had always been kind and playful. Why would he speak to his mother like that? Confused, I asked him, "Ethan, why would you say such a thing to Mommy?" His answer left me speechless. "My name is Henry. I'm 30 years old, and I work hard every day at a well-known company to support my family. My wife, Sophia, stays at home to take care of our house and our son, Ethan. She works hard every day too, juggling house chores and Ethan's care. Thanks to her, I can focus on my job, and I'm very grateful for everything she does for our family. On weekends, we try to spend as much time together as possible. Sometimes we go to the park to play or go shopping as a family. Watching Ethan grow up with Sophia by my side makes me feel incredibly lucky. Even my mom and Sophia get along really well, which I know isn't always the case in families. They often go to cafes together, and my mom helps us take care of Ethan whenever we need her. Our life was good, peaceful and free from any major problems. But lately, I noticed something was different about Sophia. Her cheerful, bright expression seemed clouded. She wasn't smiling as much as usual, and she seemed tired. One evening, I decided to ask her about it. "Sophia, are you okay? You seem a little down these days," I said. She gave me a small smile and replied, "I'm fine, really. Don't worry about me." But I wasn't convinced. I've known Sophia for years, and I could tell something was bothering her. I decided to keep an eye on things. A few nights later, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sophia came to me and said, "Henry, can we talk?" "Of course." "What's wrong?" I asked. She looked at me with tired eyes and said, "I feel like I've reached my limit with Ethan." I was shocked. Sophia had always been so patient and loving with Ethan. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's Ethan's words," she explained. "He's been using really bad language. Every time he says something hurtful, I feel like crying. I don't know how much more I can take. This was news to me." "Bad language?" He's only 4, Sophia. He probably doesn't even know what those words mean. Maybe he's just repeating something he heard at preschool. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Don't say that, Henry. You're not here during the day, so you don't know what it's like. It's not just words. It's the way he says them. He looks me in the eye and says, I hate you, or I don't love you. It's heartbreaking. I tried to calm her down. Maybe we can wait and see if this passes. He's still so young. But Sophia shook her head. We can't just wait. What if he starts saying these things to his friends or other adults? I don't want Ethan to become that kind of child. We need to figure out where he's learning this. Just as our conversation was getting more serious, we heard a small voice behind us. Ethan had woken up and walked into the living room. Mommy, Daddy, what's going on? He asked sleepily. Nothing, Ethan. Everything's okay, I said, trying to sound calm. But then, out of nowhere, Ethan turned to Sophia and said, Mommy, no. Mommy, go away. I hate you. Sophia and I both froze. I couldn't believe my son had just said those words. Ethan, I said gently, why would you say that to Mommy? That's a very hurtful thing to say. But Ethan didn't stop. I don't love you, Mommy. Go away. Sophia burst into tears. This is what I was telling you, Henry. I can't take this anymore. She grabbed her bag, stuffed in her wallet and phone, and walked out the door. I wanted to go after her, but I couldn't leave Ethan alone. I turned back to my son and asked, Ethan, why would you say such mean things to Mommy? She loves you so much. Ethan looked upset and said, I just wanted to make Mommy laugh. Laugh? Ethan, nobody laughs when you say things like, I hate you. Those words hurt people. That's not true, Ethan said. When I say, Mommy, no, or I hate you, Grandma laughs and says I'm funny. Hearing this made me stop in my tracks. Grandma? Are you sure Grandma taught you that? Yes, Ethan said. The next day, I went to my parents' house and talked to my dad about what had happened. He thought for a moment and then said, I think I overheard something like that once. Your mom was telling Ethan to say those things as a joke. She thought it would cheer Sophia up. I was furious. Why would my mom teach Ethan something so harmful? I called Sophia and told her everything. She was shocked and hurt. I thought Gloria liked me. Why would she do this? I don't know, I said, but we're going to talk to her together. The next day, Sophia and I went to my parents' house. My mom acted surprised when we confronted her. Gloria, I asked, did you teach Ethan to say, I hate you and go away to Sophia? My mom looked defensive. I don't know what you're talking about. I would never do that, but we knew the truth. It started when Dad asked, did you teach Ethan those bad words while you were looking after him? I was confused and quickly said, no, I didn't. I remember everything clearly, but after hearing Henry's story, I couldn't ignore the situation anymore. Then Mom got upset and said, why are you blaming me? She's the problem. She pointed at Lila with a mean glare. Lila stayed calm and answered firmly, if I've done something to upset you, I'm sorry. But please stop teaching Ethan those bad words. Mom's face turned red with anger. I've always hated your goody-two-shoes act, she yelled. Everyone, including Dad and I, was shocked by her sudden outburst. She continued, I've hated you from the very start. I only pretended to be a good mother-in-law. You're the one who stole my precious Henry. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom's voice got louder as she shouted, I was so angry at you that I used Ethan to get back at you. Just imagining the look on your face when your own son said those things to you made me feel so happy. You deserve this for taking Henry away from me. Hearing this made me furious. I couldn't forgive her for hurting Lila like this. But just as I was about to yell at Mom, Lila stepped forward and raised her voice. Are you kidding me? She shouted. You have a problem with me? Fine. Say it to my face. But don't you dare involve Ethan. He's just a child, and he's going to learn terrible things if you're around. I had never seen Lila so angry before. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were full of tears, but her voice was strong. She continued, I will never let you see Ethan again. I don't care what you think of me, but hurting Ethan like this is unforgivable. Stay away from him. With that, Lila stormed out of the house. Dad told me to go after her, snapping me out of my thoughts. I ran to catch up with her and tried to comfort her as we walked home together. Later, I found out that Dad had scolded Mom after we left. He told her to apologize to Lila, but she refused. She kept insisting it was all Lila's fault. Dad, tired of her behavior, told her, I never thought you were this kind of person, and brought up divorce. Mom panicked, but it was too late. Now, Lila and I have decided not to see Mom anymore. For Ethan's sake, it's better this way. As time passed, Ethan stopped saying those bad words. Whenever Lila feels down, he cheers her up in the sweetest ways. One day he said, Mommy, smile. I love you. Lila smiled back and said, Mommy loves you too. Our happy and peaceful life has finally returned, and I am determined to protect Lila and Ethan's smiles forever. If this story made you think or gave you a new perspective, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our future videos. Let's keep sharing thought-provoking stories and learning from life's lessons together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.